Thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Fred Chapin, as Lance has mentioned, and we're going to take you through a lot of different aspects about Microsoft Teams, kind of where it's come from, how long it's been around, some of the new features that really are important for carriers, and how you can leverage what Microsoft has been doing and a lot of their migration from Skype for Business to Teams. We'll go into more details about various routing options of how you can deploy this within your network, some of the different scenarios that make sense, go into some of the, I say, challenges that enterprises face today that really are opportunities for you, and then kind of wrap it up with a few use cases and a little bit more. So without further ado, let's get to the first slide here, which is Microsoft's adoption of just UC in general. So if you're familiar with Microsoft, you know that they've been doing UC or Unified Communications for a number of years. They started off with OCS, over a decade ago, probably over 15 years ago actually now, and acquired Skype a couple years ago. And so when they did that, they rebranded their UC offering Skype for Business. And kind of in that middle hand column, we talk a little bit about, in terms of Skype for Business and Skype, because they don't break it out, how pervasive it is as a platform. So you can see here just billions of users, millions of minutes, billions of installs. And then when we talk about hybrid voice deployments, we're really specifically talking about Skype for Business. And so if you look at their last quarterly report, again, tremendous growth for Microsoft. And so if you look at how many people are paying year over year, big growth up there. If you look at the revenue, again, lots of revenue. And if you look in kind of the bottom right-hand corner, this is Gartner's most recent report. This was as of just last month in terms of UC players and their ability to execute. Microsoft always does show as favorable. And so, it's one of those things that we always kind of feel of, you can try to fight them or you could also try to join them. And so in this option, we're going to talk, or in this webinar, we're going to talk about Teams, how Teams is, what Teams is, kind of how it differs from Skype for Business. And then how Microsoft has kind of shifted almost their strategy to really include a lot of you and provide, a piece of the pie to you and the ability to generate revenue. So Microsoft celebrated about a year of Teams. So if you're not familiar with Teams, it's one of those things that Microsoft is moving towards. It's a little bit different than Skype for Business and the traditional UC because it has the pervasive chat. So chat, continues. People work in teams or channels, and as you can see here, there's, over the past year, more than 3 million teams were created. If you look at kind of the user base, and I don't know because I haven't had a chance to kind of look at all the attendees and see where everybody's coming from, but all over the globe, people are using this. So you can see that over 181 different countries are using Teams all over the globe. So if you just offer services in the US, that's all right. There's a good adoption within the US, but if you're a carrier that offers services elsewhere, there's a good chance that you can get a revenue stream from those Teams users today. And we'll talk a little bit about how the US differs, well, a few of the markets differ than other countries based on what Microsoft calls calling plans, but available in a lot of different languages. So really this is, I would say, Microsoft's flagship product for UC and migration to UC, and it offers, as I said, a few different features and functionalities like that pervasive chat. They're working on making sure that all the feature transparency is the same between what people have with Skype for Business and with Teams. And there's a lot of, I would say, document repository sharing as well. And so that's kind of a big difference between that and Skype for Business. Skype for Business was more about sharing a desktop or maybe sending a file one-to-one. Teams is really about collaboration. It's more that modern work hub of kind of having all of your stuff centralized. So if we look at kind of some of the use cases and kind of introducing what Microsoft calls direct routing, we'll first kind of take a step back and talk about Skype. So Skype was, as I said, Microsoft's first foray into delivering UC online. So traditionally, customers had bought Skype for Business, or prior to that, Link, or as I mentioned kind of earlier on, OCS or LCS. That was all an on-premise implementation. And as more and more things have been moving to the cloud, and more customers have been tolerant and actually expecting to get their services from the cloud, and a lot of that has just been through a variety of other commercial services that have just made cloud and the security of the internet, and even the stability of the internet, a more effective way of, I'd say, using technology. Microsoft has transitioned their products to also take advantage of that migration. So they first started off with Skype for Business, and originally when they came out with it, they had what they called their calling plans, and calling plans actually weren't called calling plans at the time, but basically it was a way where Microsoft was the carrier. So Microsoft was essentially directly competing with carriers if somebody wanted to have Skype for Business online. After several months of doing that, the adoption, I'd probably say, wasn't as quick as they saw it. So they decided to add some functionality, and we worked closely with Microsoft to launch what they called their CCE, or the Cloud Connector Edition, which allowed customers to leverage their own SBC on-prem and bring those calls up to Skype for Business online. And that worked really well, especially because calling plans, which Microsoft had introduced, at the time had only covered, I think initially just the US. So really it was a US-centric offering. Over the years, they've gone to about 10 countries, but still not a pervasive service. And so now as they migrate to Teams, they saw it as an opportunity to kind of shift the paradigm of, do they need something on-prem? Because obviously the more things that you have on-premise, the harder it is to get somebody to onboard, the higher the friction is. So really they saw that this was their opportunity to find a different way of doing business. And so they have found a way, of course, now that customers aren't required to have an SBC on-prem. Carriers can have an SBC within their network and can provide calling plans to Microsoft customers without Microsoft having to offer it. So now, rather than competing against carriers, they're really opening the door and inviting carriers to provide services, especially because the calling plans don't always fit every customer. A lot of carriers in different parts of the world have different ways to bundle offerings that Microsoft just never will compete against. And so they took this opportunity to do so. And the Teams phone system really just offers, as I said, the UC services that Skype had, or Skype for Business had, into Teams. And so we'll break it down a little bit more so that way you kind of see some of the differences. So with Skype for Business, it's been around since 2007, works really great with large businesses. A lot of smaller businesses, you could deploy it, but it was a lot of servers, a lot of moving pieces and parts, a lot of deployment costs. And so a lot of the smaller SMBs never really adopted it. Of course, we've been supporting Microsoft for a number of years, obviously Ribbon being our new brand, but through kind of the acquisitions and kind of the legacy of our company from Sonus to NET, we, and of course the people still here at our company, have been supporting Microsoft over the years. And if a customer does have a Skype for Business on-prem, carriers do offer SIP trunking services to either the mediation server or to Ribbon SBCs that are on site. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Microsoft first made their foray into, I'd say, cloud services with Skype for Business Online. Skype for Business Online, was great for SMBs in the sense that now they didn't have to deploy an on-premise Skype for Business implementation. Of course, customers still can. Some customers still do. New versions are still coming out, but really Skype for Business Online made it a lot more applicable. And of course, Ribbon, continue to support Microsoft in that kind of topology, as I mentioned earlier, with the CCE and bundling CCE functionality into our offering. And now with Teams, became really a UC offering really in late 2017, and that's kind of when Microsoft added, I'd say, feature functionality. It wasn't until really this summer that Microsoft opened up kind of the doors, and it wasn't just the calling plans kind of from the Skype for Business world that was kind of being ported in to the Teams. They really, this summer, allowed customers to bring their own SBCs, did, of course, a whole rollout of certified SBCs, of course, which Ribbon is a part of, and really opened it up to allowing customers to deploy what they want. And so if you look at how voice can be brought into Teams, there's really kind of a couple of different options. So when we talk about Teams, Teams is an all-cloud option. There is no on-premise version of that. It's within Office 365. And phone system is kind of what they call their PBX, or their call control. And really there's two ways of getting calls in and out to the PSTN. As I mentioned earlier, one is the Microsoft calling plans offered in about 10 different countries, same countries that are offered with the Skype for Business online service. And Microsoft is the carrier. So it's for somebody who wants a single bill from a single carrier, one throat to choke, or one handshake, whatever your analogy is for that. And in that case, customer doesn't need an on-premise SBC. They just get the calling plan straight from Microsoft. When customers choose the direct routing option, that's when there's a little bit more choice, a little bit more flexibility. Microsoft in this case is not the PSTN provider. We'll talk about some of the reasons why customers a lot of times choose not to go with Microsoft as their PSTN provider. And either an on-premise SBC or a carrier-hosted SBC is required in this instance. So this is essentially where you as a carrier can come in and start getting revenue from Microsoft Team customers, is this direct routing. So if you hear the term direct routing, that's kind of a key of, hey, I can provide value, I can get revenue, and this is where I fit in. And we'll go into the topologies of kind of where that makes sense. So, one of the first questions, of course, everybody has is, well, if Microsoft offers this service, and I'm in a country, say like the US, where Microsoft offers services, why would I want to get it from anyone else? Why not just go straight to Microsoft? So of course, one of the reasons is that depending on the size of the organization, the calling plan costs might not fit into the enterprise budget. So you pay on a per seat basis, so it's not a bundling of services. So if you think about SIP trunking, and as a carrier, your costs and what you charge a customer for SIP trunking, if you look at that and you look at kind of the standard, I'd say, amount of calling or trunk to person ratio that a typical enterprise uses, a lot of times SIP trunks still make far more sense. If you're talking about users that are on the phone all the time, okay, well, maybe it would make sense, but again, potentially not. Also, if your users occasionally do calling, or sorry, your customers have users that occasionally do calling internationally, Microsoft has domestic calling plans, they have international calling plans. If you're doing international calling plans for every single user, even though they're only calling once a month for 10 minutes to Mexico, obviously that's not going to add a lot of value, and it's going to add a lot of cost. As I mentioned, I think a couple of times, it's only available in about 10 countries. So if you're in Australia, and that's through a specific partner, or if you're in Puerto Rico, the US, Germany, France, Belgium, Spain, there's about 10 countries where it can be offered. But if you're in Singapore, if you're in Hong Kong, if you're in New Zealand, if you're in Canada, calling plan's not available. So if your customer has an office there, if your customer is wholly located there, well, they can't buy that from Microsoft. So of course, obviously, that's another reason why a customer would choose to use direct routing as well. And then I'd say kind of the big final one, and granted this isn't the final one, but sometimes customers have a contract. They might already have a contract with you, and their contract with you says they'll provide, they'll not cancel services with you for another 2 years or 3 years. So if they're in a contract, that's obviously a reason why they're not going to cancel the contract and go with Microsoft. A lot of times customers have on-site legacy endpoints or on-site legacy PBXs that they need to interwork. And that's another reason, of course, why they would want an SBC, whether that might be an SBC on-prem and or an SBC in conjunction with a SBC in the cloud from a carrier such as yourself. And so I'm now going to hand it over to Shambhu to talk a little bit about the deployment options.
Hey, Shambhu, you should have controls now. And I did just want to remind the audience while you're grabbing your screen there, to please do ask questions. The bottom right-hand side of your screen is an ask a question box. If you don't see it, there might be a little question mark on the right side of your screen. If you click that, it'll expand out the ask a question area. So we have people standing by ready to answer your questions, so ask away. Shambhu, take it away.
Okay. Hi, this is Shambhu Rai, product manager for SBC products at Ribbon Communications. I'll be taking you through some of the Teams deployment scenarios and the use cases and options we have there. To simply take you through, right, how the carrier Teams direct routing works, you're looking at how enterprise will deploy SBC to work with the Microsoft Teams phone system, right? So typical enterprises deployment will have a PBX, a bunch of Teams users being served by the Microsoft Teams Online and the phone system over there. You have the SBC in premises, which is connecting over the SIP to the phone system for the voice services, and SBC connecting to the PSTN, right? So that's the typical enterprise deployment we have. And what we do here is that SBC, which was doing the SIP trunking for the PSTN, and the Team certified SBC, which needed to be deployed in each branch, can be moved into the service provider network, and it can essentially still do the same thing. The Team certified SBC deployed in the service provider network can serve the enterprises, and not just one enterprise. It can serve multiple enterprises. You can serve thousands of enterprises from the same SBC. You can have each configured as a tenant, and thousands of tenants depending on the SBC platform. The numbers will depend, but based on the scale and the traffic requirements, you can have the same SBC provide the services for multiple enterprises. Right. Now, why would a carrier support direct routing, right? What is in it for you, and how does it, what sense does it make for the enterprises, right? Brett touched on this. Direct routing enables carriers to offer the voice services to the Teams enterprises and customers, and get revenue out of that. So that's really a new revenue stream which wasn't available in the Skype for Business or other previous Microsoft offerings. Now that is available, and also note that this multi-tenant driven SBC deployment, that is more cost effective. You are using the same SBC to serve multiple enterprises, so less Capex and operation overheads in place of having the SBC deployed in each branch office and each enterprise. You're using the single scalable SBC in the carrier for interconnecting the Microsoft phone system. So the cost-wise, it makes sense. It's more efficient to operate. It obviates the need of deploying the team-certified SBC in the enterprises. So it's really taking away the operational overheads from the enterprise IT folks as well. In this deployment, carrier would be providing the PSTN services, and of course, the enterprises would be charged by the carriers for such services. This is another variation of what you can do, right? So this is another use case I'm showing here. If you have a large enterprise with multiple offices, you can have the SBC, the carrier, serve the different enterprise offices, provide them the interworking, interconnectivity across the branch offices. At the same time, you can do the Microsoft Teams interconnection as well, right? So in this case, it's really the same SBC which is doing everything, right? It's a team certified SBC to serve the customers in branch offices and over internet for the Microsoft Teams. It is also providing you the interconnectivity, dial plans interworking from one office to another, the secure interconnection, including the DOS policing and all of that good stuff. The policy enforcement for whether it's the traffic policing, the rate limiting, call admission control, the media policies, all of that can be done through the same SBC, and that with the high scale and performance, right? Real-time performance, high scale, right? So it's efficient. You can do the transcoding. You can do the interworking, policing, all the media policy enforcement, call admission control, and enforcement. All the security policies can be implemented over there. So it makes sense. It's more efficient to deploy the SBC for the Teams interconnection and overload it with all the supporting multiple branch offices of the large enterprises as well. So you can have sort of both the use cases combined in here. Okay. I wanted to highlight the point here that carrier direct routing deployments are supported on all 11 SBCs now. So that includes SBC as well as SBC core. Both SBC core and edge supports multiple tenants. So you can have the SBC edge deployed in the carrier network and support multiple enterprises. SBC edge does wildcard certificates, and there is a configuration instructions available. How do you configure multiple tenants on the SBC edge? We can. There is a link on the slides. We can make it available to you. Same with SBC core. SBC core is traditionally, it's always used for multiple tenants. You can have multiple certificates, Johns, TCs configured for each tenant, and you can have thousands of enterprises being served from the same SBC. And again, we have the configuration instructions for the SBC core for deploying Microsoft Teams direct routing available, right? Microsoft Teams direct routing is offered in two configurations. Right now, what is available is direct connect non-media bypass, and in that model, what happens is all the Microsoft Teams user send both signaling as well as media. You can see encrypted SRTP calls to Microsoft Teams Online media proxy, which is sitting in the cloud in the Azure. All the media from the Teams user goes to the Azure cloud, and then that will go to the Teams certified SBC and the PSTN, right, for the PSTN connection, right. That is what is live in production today, and all the ribbon SBCs, SBC core platforms and SBC edge platforms are certified to work with the Microsoft Teams with media non-bypass. We have completed the certification testing, so this is all these SBCs are listed on the Microsoft website as well. The release certified on the SBC core products is SBC 6.2 release, and on the SBC Edge, it's a R7.0.2 release for 1000, 2000. So you need to, you can use your existing SBCs, whether it's SBC 5400, 7000 SWI, or 1K, 2K, and upgrade to appropriate releases, and you should be able to enable, you should be able to use the existing SBCs for Microsoft Teams direct connection. Now, if you notice this in this non-media bypass configuration, all the Teams user media is going through the Azure cloud through the Microsoft media proxy. This is a bit inefficient and at times. So Microsoft is working on something called Direct Connect Media Bypass. This will reduce the latency. And in this case, what happens is the media from Microsoft Teams users bypasses the Microsoft Teams Online or Azure Cloud, and it can directly go to the Teams SBC to the PSTN network. So that's the direct connect mode. This is something which is under test. We are actively working on that with Microsoft, and this is being tested. There are a few issues which are being fixed. We expect this to enter the tab in a few weeks. Tab is more of being available for testing with Microsoft Teams Online. And again, for this deployment mode, we would be supporting Microsoft Direct Connect Media Bypass on all the SBC, ribbon SBC platforms, and same SBC Core 6.2 release will support the media bypass as well, and SBC as products are 8.0 release should be used for Direct Connect Media Bypass configurations. Okay. With that, I will pass the things back to Brad Chapin, who will take you through some of the case studies and how why ribbon, right? What are the differentiators for ribbon? If you have any questions, I can take it now.
Hey Brad, before you keep going, this is Lance. Sorry to interject. I just wanted to mention we've had a ton of questions coming in through the chat. We really appreciate everybody's involvement there. If we don't answer your question live, on the webinar, via the chat, or verbally towards the end, please do know that we will get back to you. We'll make sure that all your questions get answered. And as a matter of fact, when we end the webinar today, a quick little pop-up should come up on your screen. If you have additional questions, there's going to be a little option to have somebody reach out and contact you. So I just wanted to mention that before we keep moving, but thank you for all the questions and keep those coming. Go ahead, Brett.
All right, thank you. I think I have my questions popped out now. All right, oh, sorry, let me go back a slide here. All right, so in terms of some of the enterprise challenges, so I talked earlier about how customers that are looking at Teams, a lot of them have challenges. A lot of them are looking to a partner to help solve those challenges. And so when we look at the various challenges that enterprises have today, really all those equate to opportunities for you as carriers. So if we kind of look at it in kind of 4 different buckets here, one of the biggest ones is system interoperability. So customers typically have PBXs of all sorts of different vendors, and that's one of the things that they're looking to do is to move on to a UC platform, to unify things. Some customers are also looking to centralize I'd say how their employees work, and so that's why a lot of them are looking at Teams. If you look at kind of some of the intro slides of how many millions of groups have been formed, how many customers are using it, there's obviously a lot of demand for people to work in a kind of a different way. When Shambhu was talking kind of about policy and dial plan and routing, enterprises have the exact same issues where a lot of times the reason why they're moving from their to a UC platform is, hey, let's just move to a point and click environment where I can click on somebody and call them, because I have some sites that are 4 digits, some that are 5 digits, some that require an 8 before dialing the 4-digit, and it's just a big mess for a lot of customers. So a lot of customers are looking to solve those issues. Customers want to move to new technology, not as much anymore, but some still have some legacy H323 video. So sometimes there's some value in the fact that the SBC provides that and can maybe interwork some of their legacy devices, whether it's a legacy PBX or a legacy video type thing. Obviously, Microsoft Skype for Business rollouts have been difficult for a lot of enterprises because it's a lot of moving pieces and parts, and that's a big reason why a lot of users are moving to Teams is to move to a cloud-based option. Microsoft has put a lot of support behind Teams as really their path forward. From how I see it in the marketplace, it's all about getting the parity to Skype for Business Online. So really, it's about getting that parity between Skype for Business Online and Teams, so that way they can move more and more users onto Teams. And when Lance was talking about one of the questions, I did see one of the questions asked by one of the people as it relates to licensing and Microsoft licensing. A lot of times we actually do talk in these slides about Microsoft licensing. We didn't do it today, but apparently, it still shows up as a question. So let me just answer that real quickly, that Teams is supported on all of the licenses, whether that's an E1, an E3, and E5. Teams is always included, and part of the reason for that is they're trying to make Teams highly adoptable. However, just because you have Teams doesn't mean that you get direct routing or voice capabilities within Teams. So when we talked earlier about the calling plan and how kind of the calling plan or direct routing was kind of like a sub piece of phone system or that license where Microsoft essentially is that PBX or that call signaling layer, the calling plan kind of uses phone system, and the direct routing uses phone system. That phone system license is included in E5. So from the question, where does it make sense? What users using what? If your customer has E5, then you can leverage direct routing with them to provide them inbound and outbound trunking to their phone system, Microsoft's phone system using their E5 license. If they're at a lower license like an E3 or an E1, they can do what we call a phone system add-on. It used to be called a Cloud PBX add-on. They rebranded, so Cloud PBX is phone system. If they do a phone system add-on, I think it's about list prices, I think about $8 per user. So if you have an E3, to get up to an E5 is about a $15 list price difference. For about $8, about half the price, you can just add the phone system. So you could have a customer that is using Teams, says, wow, this Teams is really great, but I'd really like to use the calling capabilities within it. They could add the phone system license on top. What they pay, is partly with the Microsoft contract, but the list price is $8, and that allows them to now adopt Teams as their phone system. So in terms of some of the challenges, kind of the second bucket here, sometimes people have a mobile workforce. So of course, Teams has a mobile client. If you have direct routing, you can leverage, getting the calls directly on the mobile phone without using calling minutes on your phone. It just shows up over the LTE. It's essentially an over-the-top application. Some of the value in that, I think, comes a lot more when you have direct routing. So Shambhu was talking about the differences between, the non-media bypass and the media bypass. So when media bypass comes into place, now as a mobile workforce, if I'm at a Starbucks or if I'm just over the mobile network or if I'm in a home, having that direct connection will reduce that latency so that that media bypass is really going to come into account when you have a mobile workforce. In the instance where non-media bypass, which is what it exists as today, if everybody's in a centralized location, they're on an MPLS circuit, it's going to be perfect call quality. You're probably not going to have to worry about latency. But as you start kind of dispersing users, that's when media bypass makes a lot of sense, especially because you can also do some transcoding as well. And then other challenges that customers has is conference calling, migrating from TDM to IP. So this helps with a lot of that. Having an SBC helps with a lot of that. Depending on the type of customers that you work with. If they have a lot of branches, or maybe they're a big company that has a lot of retail shops. We recently acquired a company called Edgewater Networks. Edgewater Networks was, I'd say, the leader in network edge orchestration. So a lot of that orchestration at the edge, the SD-WAN optimization, a lot of kind of what they were doing in terms of low-touch provisioning. Not only are their products, we're going to get them all team certified as well, but in terms of just some of their intellectual property and how they did stuff, that's going to start filtrating into a lot of our products as well. And then, of course, other things that customers are looking for are things like emergency services. So that's another reason to get onto a cloud services. Rather than having to have a PBX on site with local T1s, by going this direction, they can really get, let's say, emergency services and get it probably at a lower cost than running an analog circuit or 2 analog circuits to a key system, in a retail branch location. So this is one way of doing that as well. And then just, from the perspective of, especially with, again, media bypass enabled branch-to-branch communication that, rather than sending everything to Azure, branch-to-branch a lot of times is a lot faster, lower latency. So again, other opportunities where if you're providing a hosted service, people don't have to backhaul all the way up to the closest Azure data center. Because a lot of times, Microsoft has, I'm trying to remember how many global Azure data centers, but it may not be as close to their locations as you as a carrier would be. And then, last one is contact centers. That contact centers is always that niche, that outlier that is very different. And Teams and even Skype for Business Online really didn't deal with contact centers. So there's always upselling that you can do that, as you're bringing in a revenue stream by really providing trunking services and getting those Microsoft customers potentially that had traditionally maybe only talked to Microsoft or maybe, was talking just with their local carrier because they were getting, I don't know, TDM trunking to a gateway that was connecting to the Skype for Business server. Now that they essentially are, really opening it up to anybody, to a certain extent, your market opens up to being able to reach beyond maybe just, a local geographic area, which is much the same that happened when things went from traditional TDM trunking to IP trunking. And so, how you deal with tones and announcements and DTF handling, those are all things that an SBC can help you with. And so from that perspective, all of those various challenges that a customer has are opportunities for you. And we have, of course, a lot of differentiation and competitive advantages in a lot of this space. And so one of the things that I think that Shambhu was talking about is just in terms of scale. So when you're talking about Capex and Opex related opportunities, the larger a SBC can scale to and the more tenants you can support on a single box, of course, gives you a market advantage, because as you can scale and still provide the same performance, that's, I'd say, a value add to you of not having to deploy box after box after box after box to keep scaling. So that should, of course, reduce your capital expenditures. And then, of course, operationally, the less boxes or SBCs that you're maintaining, it's obviously better for you. And of course, also better for the customer. So if a customer thinks about how many retail locations that they have, and they go, geez, we have 100 locations, we're going to have to deploy 100 SBCs. Well, if they're providing a hosted service or attaching to a hosted direct routing service from you as a carrier, well, that's 100 SBCs that they potentially don't have to buy. Granted, there's reasons why they might want to deploy an SBC on site, but depending on the scenario, there could be some cost savings and some scale that you can provide to them. In terms of cloud services, we've been offering a cloud SBC for a number of years. We've had customers running on AWS, I probably think for 3 or 4 years now. So if breaking out into a new region is something that you're looking to do, something that you could do in a public, I'd say, deployment. We'll also talk about some of the other options as we go into some of the slides at the end. But really, security is what it's all about. And an SBC, as many of you know, is first and foremost, it's about security. And while some customers in the past maybe deployed without an SBC, I think that Microsoft has realized the value of an SBC and has their sellers have, I'd say, told customers that they need to get their trunking services, from providers that have an SBC. And part of, I'd say, the certification process for Microsoft in the past, if you wanted to offer SIP trunking services to Skype for Business on-prem, you had to buy, of course, an SBC, and then you had to go through a testing lab. A lot of times these were not necessarily quick and easy testing. A lot of times companies spent 6 months testing. That thick, heavy process is not going to be the same process that they use for direct routing. With direct routing, if you have an SBC from a certified vendor, it's a CERN release, you can bring it on board. There's no certification testing you as a carrier have to do. So really that helps speed to market and allows them to really ramp up how many carriers can offer services with Microsoft. Shambhu hit a little bit on kind of the policy and the core and kind of the routing. So if you're not familiar with the Ribbon PSX offering, we can do a variety of different routing based on, call it mission control, based on MOS scores, based on time of day. There's all sorts of different ways that we can route calls to, I'd say, deliver the most cost-effective bottom line to you, and again, makes you more competitive from a carrier to deliver services that will typically be far less and more profitable to you, and even less dollar-wise to a customer than a Microsoft calling plan. And in terms of just why Ribbon, kind of in the summary slide here, we've been doing this for over 20 years, so decades of service. If you look at Ribbon and kind of the IPR that it had between not only Sonus, but GenBand, and now Edgewater Networks and NET, it is, a seasoned group of, voice veterans that have been doing this for a really long time, been working with Microsoft for a really long time, and a lot of patents and intellectual property to make sure that you're as successful as possible. And one of the things that we typically do is ensure that it's not just us saying that our products are secure. We typically go to outside agencies, whether they're, black hat, doing testing interoperability to look for security holes, or whether it's, having a outsourced company like Miracom do validation testing to see how well we perform. Other vendors sometimes do the same thing as well, and sometimes actually that's how we get some of our competitive information on how many calls per second another vendor can do, or things of that nature, because sometimes it's not listed on their products. But all of these reports, and you can kind of actually see here at the bottom some of the ones that we've used with Miracom. They're all hosted up on their website, that our boxes don't crash, that calls don't get dropped, how many calls per second we can do, can they basically break through the system. And time again, Miracom says you're secure, you have our stamp of approval, you are Miracom certified secure. And obviously, one vendor, is one way to do it. Hearing of some of the press releases about some of the vendors that we do secure and who we do offer services for, just gives you that peace of mind that if those vendors aren't being hacked and third-party companies are saying that we can't be hacked, that just means that you'll be able to provide more uptime and services. And so our SBCs are, I'd say, designed to really deal with, I'd say, what's the best way? That we break down our architecture in different piece parts and they scale independently. So in terms of network processing, we have wire throughput, and that doesn't slow down. The transcode is best in performance. If we're doing transcode, that's not going to prevent you from now doing SRTP, or if you do SRTP, that's not going to slow down on how many sessions we can do. So we architect it across all three different matrices for the highest performance, and if you're doing one thing over another, it's not going to impact the performance of the box as a whole. That if you're doing transcode, it's not going to kill your wire speed, throughput, or things of that nature. And so we actually, when we were preparing for this webinar, I kind of looked at, why somebody would want to have multi-tenancy and some of the value of multi-tenancy, and kind of, as Shambu said, you can use the SBC that you currently have today. If you're at a certain software release, you can start earning revenue today. So if you already have an SBC in place from Ribbon, it's already, like on, say, for example, the core SBC, it's running 6.2, or on the Edge SBC, it's running 7.02, and you want to have multi-tenancy, it's supported across both platforms. If you want to add customers, it's already certified. All you can do is just start adding customers and growing. And good chance, depending on how at capacity you are on that SBC. If you have a product like an SBC 7000 that can do 120,000 transcode sessions or 150,000 concurrent sessions, chances are you're not at your capacity and you have a lot more ability to keep growing without having to add more users. Same things with calls per second. That if you're now doing multi-tenancy, well, you might have a lot of customers in the same region, and an SBC that only does a couple hundred calls per second might not be sufficient. And so we looked at some of the competitions in terms of what they said that they could do in terms of transcode. One customer, from a single transcode, you would need 286 single instances, or if you kind of clustered them together, still, we could transcode more than 10 times as much as them in a single, as we could in a single box versus their cluster. Or in terms of concurrent sessions, more than 3 times as many concurrent sessions, or even calls per second, more than 2.5. Obviously, if you're doing research, feel free to kind of, validate these numbers, but this is kind of when we were looking out there, that looked pretty much that, we're the industry leader in terms of offering direct routing and being able to do calls per second transcode and session counts. And there are different ways of going to market, and I kind of mentioned this earlier on, that while you may not have a Ribbon SBC today, and maybe you say, geez, I'm not sure, I hear that a lot of teams have been deployed. Some people might be using it on their E1 license, and so maybe they haven't deployed voice. I don't know what that market is for me today. There are a variety of different ways of getting to market earlier. So we've done, I think, a press release or two with New Wave, which is a carrier in the US. They do have a wholesale model. So if you're thinking, well, geez, I want to get in on offering these services, but I don't have a Ribbon SBC, I'm not ready to do this today, well, you can connect, up with, a vendor like NewWave. There potentially could be other carriers that want to offer this as well, and you can work with them to potentially offer the direct routing, get it at wholesale pricing, so you might not make as much money, but you still have that opportunity to do value-add services. And that might be a value-add service where you have a hosted contact center solution. If you don't have value-add services, potentially you can work with, a carrier, that does. I know that they have script-based provisioning, so rather than, taking days or weeks to turn up a customer, it's gone into like, hours, pretty much to turn up a customer. And so, just a quote from NewWave, that when we talked to them, they said, "We don't have outages. We don't have customer-facing service interruptions ever." So again, just kind of a proof point of customers that have deployed with direct routing with ribbon SBCs. NewWave is an example of that, and they're finding value in that. Also, I had mentioned the fact that, in addition to, companies like Miracom that do third-party testing, and apparently I have an automatic slide on this one where it's going to jump up, but Verizon has gone with us as an SBC as a service, and so, that's one way of also delivering value, is to use this as software as a service. And so if you don't have a ribbon sales team, or actually if you do, you can reach out to them. You can schedule a workshop to discuss direct routing in more detail. If you don't have a ribbon sales team, you can always call the 855 number that's listed here on the screen. You can also go to go.rbbn or ribbon.com/Microsoft-Teams. We can collect your information there and get back to you. If you're not having any luck with the phone call or the contact me, there's my name, email, and phone number. You can always reach out to me and always route you to somebody who can assist you. If you have specific questions, always more than happy to answer questions as it relates to Microsoft, direct routing, things of that service. We have documentation online. I think somebody had asked in the questions whether we have documentation. Documentation is listed here. When you get kind of the slides, it'll probably come in a PDF nature, but you'll be able to click on these and go straight to the documentation on how to set it up. If you're coming to Ignite, Ignite is only a few weeks away. We'll be in booth number 1915, and we'll have a plethora of voice experts there, and we'll have diagrams where we can architect out kind of your network and do discussions of how you can connect teams to the rest of the world through direct routing and how that could work in your network, what changes you may want to do, and kind of how you can get to really get additional revenue from customers that are on Microsoft Teams. And I think with that, we'll open it up to Q&A. I think I'll stop sharing my screen here so I can kind of go into some of the questions. I don't know, Dwight or Lance, if you have been reviewing some of them. Let me just go through some of the unanswered ones.
Sure, Brad. Take a minute to take a look at those. We've had so many questions, so really do appreciate everybody's interaction. While you're reviewing those, I do have one that came in. I can go ahead and kind of kick us off with. It's from someone who already has a ribbon SBC. They wanted to make sure, or how do they make sure that that SBC supports direct routing for Teams?
Yeah, so there's no special feature or license for direct routing. So it's essentially in the code base. And as mentioned, I think it was on Shampoo's slides, so you can always review back later in case you have the slides and you want to just check. But it was listed that with the SBC Edge products, which is examples like the SBC 1000, 2000, Swaylight, those products are at a version 7, so 7.0. I think 2 or maybe 3 is the version that you would want to be on if you are using a ribbon core SBC. And typically by that we mean the SBC 5000, which kind of comes in a couple different flavors like the 5100 series or the 52 or the 5400 series. Or if you're on the 7000 or even the SBC SWE, those are 6.2. So if you download the most latest version of 6.2, that'll have every fix and patch. Shampoo was talking about media bypass. There's still some changes that are happening. So there's some minor things that for direct routing, you might have to apply a patch when all is said and done. But for right now, we don't have any, I think, open work that we're working on right now. We're just trying to validate all the scenarios. And as it kind of goes through some of those customer trials, which Shampoo mentioned is TAP. TAP stands for Technical Assurance, I think, Program. And essentially it's a beta that Microsoft does. And so as it goes through there, sometimes corner cases come out. We might have to implement a patch, but those are the two versions. I see that Reinhard had asked, if that the SBCs in the carrier cloud, how do you connect to the legacy PBX that might have an ISDN trunk? They might not have a SIP trunk. So one way would be, of course, to use an SBC. So our SBC Edge portfolios, and when I say that, I actually mean the physical ones, because the SBC 1000 and 2000 have ISDN ports. So you can do T1, E1, actually you can do analog trunking. So that is one way that if you put a box like that on site, that's one way of doing that. The Edgewater product would be another way to do that as well. And so in terms of Edgewater, we're still working on bringing them in, doing all the various validation testing of checking in with the carrier cloud that it fits all the various use cases, working with them to directly connect to Teams. So some of that, if you have been using Edgewater, we can get you some details on potentially minimum versions that might be required as we kind of move along with that. Somebody asked about Active Directory routing and if that's the best practice. So depending on the customer, Active Directory routing, which is supported in the Edge SBCs natively, just straight on the box. That's included on the core products. We use PSX and kind of Active Directory is done through the PSX, which is the policy enforcement. Those are two great ways of looking at whether the user is a Teams user, looking at whether the user is a Skype for Business user or not, because sometimes a customer's in transition. They might have, is kind of Shampoo was showing some of the slides, they might have a contact center in Cincinnati. They might, that's on an Avaya. They might have a Cisco call manager in Boston. And so depending on what they have, Active Directory is sometimes the simplest way to do a quick data dip, find out if they're a Teams user or not. And that's one really good way of figuring out whether you should route to Teams or route to Skype for Business or route, rather than doing it on a user by user, DID by DID, because that's kind of a heavy way to have to deal with that. And somebody asked about using a centralized SBC SWE. Absolutely. Whether it is a centralized SBC SWE, whether that's running in your network, whether that's running in a public network like AWS, the SBC SWE code base is the same as the SBC 7000 and 5000. So when we talk about SBC core, doesn't matter if it's the virtual SWE. I think when I was talking about the sessions, I was talking about the 7000 in particular. Obviously, if you're using a SWE, you can kind of scale that up and scale that down based on the processor, the virtual CPUs or the virtual memory that you're attaching to it. But absolutely, same version as with the, all the others. 6.2 latest version is ideal. Shampoo, did you have something to add?
Right, that's right, yeah. 6.2, all SBC core platforms, SBC SWE, 5000, 7000, that's the version to go. I see a question out here, are there any transcoding limitations if you go with virtualized SBC route versus physical SBC? No, we do support transcoding on the CPU, DSP, as well as on the GPU. And so there are some minor differences in terms of transcoding combinations on the GPU, we have most codecs supported on the CPU today. We are increasing the number of codecs we support on the GPU as we go. But from the team's perspective, whatever is needed, we have it on the DSPs and CPUs.
Yeah, I saw a few questions in here about BroadWorks, Skype for Business, and MS Teams together with one routing platform. So yeah, I mean, obviously an SBC can route to multiple destinations. I was kind of talking a little bit about that with Active Directory, but regardless, you could always use the PSX to route to multiple different applications. Most people probably aren't going to be using BroadWorks in Teams for a single user. Chances are they'll use, if they've decided to use Teams and voice with Teams, that's what they're going to use for that user. They're probably not going to also have a phone. However, if they do choose to do that, because some customers say they want to have a physical phone on the desktop, maybe they are worried about buying a new phone that's a team certified phone, or they don't want to have a Skype for Business certified phone. They just have a standard SIP phone. They can either use, depending, they can use the built-in SIP registrar, of the SBC 1000, 2000 for survivability. But more so, what I wanted to get at is we do support SIP forking in Teams. So even with media bypass, we'll be supporting that if you're routing to multiple different devices, and it could be routing to Teams and doing a SIP fork to a BroadSoft phone via BroadWorks, that could be a supported scenario as well. But I don't think that most customers would probably want to have BroadWorks and voice calling with Teams, just due to the fact that it would be extra cost.
There is a question, are the multi-tenancy session measures based upon the particular ribbon SBC model platform? Yes, the number of sessions SBC platform supports depend on the model, right? So if you're buying SBC 7000, you can do more number of sessions up to 150,000. You can do more trunk groups and more number of zones. That will enable you to do more number of enterprises versus 5K or 3 configurations. So the capacity depends on the SBC model, right? So depending on your capacity needs, you can pick the SBC model. But the functionality, the Teams interop is supported across all the SBC ribbon SBCs.